The recent tragic passing of the Stranglers' virtuoso keyboard genius Dave Greenfield was a stark and powerful reminder of just how inventive and brilliant this group was. Like many fans, I went back to find solace in those much-played albums that soundtracked my life from teenage years. Trying to choose a favourite is difficult, but for want of argument, I'm going to dig out Black and White, because the third album is a key record, and arguably the first record that escaped from punk into post-punk terrain. The album was conceived and written in December 1977 in Bearshanks Lodge in Northampton, whilst the rest of the British punk scene was still trying to formulate what punk rock was exactly. The Stranglers had already found an escape route. Many people will point to bands like Wire as maybe perhaps being the first post-punk record with their brilliant record, Pink Flag. But in many ways, and I would argue, the Stranglers found a completely different way of making music. They pulled rock music apart. This, for me, is the first album where everybody's playing lead all at the same time. It was an album built around the bass guitar. Two key constituents of post-punk, where you go to the darker gothic end of post-punk, or the more experimental John Peel version of it. The Stranglers were on an astonishing and truly inventive high when they made this record. They deliberately set out to tear up their own manuscript and write something completely and utterly different. They also matched the mood of the times. This was a dystopian, dark record, the kind of record that Joy Division regretted getting kudos for making a year and a half later. You only had to speak to Joy Division bass player Peter Hook to find out how much in awe he had for the Stranglers and J.J. Burnell. He turned up at their gig on the Black and White tour at Stafford Bingley Hall with a camera, a rarity at the time, not to take photographs of the band, but to take photographs of J.J. Burnell's bass gear set up on the stage to work out what kind of amp he would buy to replicate that sound with Joy Division. The Stranglers, for musicians, were a massive and key influence. For the media, not so much. There is an argument they've been written out of history, and to a certain extent that is true. There have been hints that the sound was changing. It was getting heavier. It was getting denser. It was matching that claustrophobia of the UK in late 77, early 78. The 5-minute single, which came out that January, was an incredible record. You just have to watch the video of it to get the feel of just how intense and dangerous the Stranglers actually were at that time. I love that single, and its B-side, Rocket to the Moon. It pointed in a different direction. And there is an argument that both tracks would have fitted beautifully onto the Black and White album. But there is a slight difference, because the one thing the Black and White album had over 5 minutes, which I think is a brilliant sounding record, an avalanche, a tsunami of great sound, Black and White had space in its sound. And I'm not sure if this is true or not, but the Stranglers seem to have some kind of resonance with dub. The idea of like layers of sound, different spaces, everything had its own kind of space. They already played around with reggae and dub and peaches, of course, and on the Black and White album, returned to this theme with Nice and Sleazy, which is their little Egyptian reggae type track, with that fantastic, iconic bass line by Burnell over that kind of scratching, scraping Telecaster sound of Hugh Cornwell's guitar, as well as the late and great Dave Greenfield's amazing keyboard, which for once and for all put all those Ray Manzarek comparisons into the bin with his space-age, squeaky, squiggly sound that was a total trip at the time. The album's first track is Tank, a powerful, bludgeoning affair. It was kind of the closest to punk rock they'll probably get on this record, but it was somewhere else. I would argue it's a psychedelic track. The Stranglers are always great at psychedelia. I don't mean Paisley Shirt psychedelia. This was a stark, modern, monochromatic psychedelia. The sound of Tank was the sound of a tank bulldozing its way through the street, and it doesn't really stretch the metaphor to see that the song is actually about the Stranglers themselves. No matter how much they were getting slagged in the press, no matter how much they get misunderstood outside their huge following of fans, they were going to pursue their own direction, even if that meant alienating all those fans who had just come on board to their first two classic albums, Rattus Norvegicus and No More Heroes. Most bands would have gone for a Rattus Part 3 at this stage of the game. The Stranglers decided to do something completely and utterly different. And I want to underline and say this again. Black and White is the first post-punk album. It came out in March 1978. Nobody even said post-punk on that kind of time. And let's not forget that John Peel was embracing Stranglers at that period. And I remember very clearly that night he played the whole album, one end to the other. The third track on the album is the haunting and dark Outside Tokyo, another one of those Stranglers' strange and quirky, weird timing songs with a hint of a waltz about it, a song about watches stopping and the end of time. How perfect for this coronova virus period. Outside Tokyo sounds like time melting. It sounds like time stopping. I remember clearly sat in the sixth form in a lesson, whistling the tune, and people turn around and say, "Can you not whistle something a bit more cheerful? That's the most miserable, melancholic piece of music that you're humming and whistling all afternoon." But that's just the kind of person I am. I love that melancholic darkness, and the Stranglers embracing it beautifully on this album. There was the other tracks on the white side of the record, and conceptually, I really love this idea of having the white side and the black side of the record. Was Rise of the Robots, a look into the AI future. The Stranglers are always futuristic in their thought processes at the time, far more intellectual than they're allowed to be, far more intellectual than they're admitting. Of course, the college graduates mix with the self-taught genius of Jet Black and Dave Greenfield's own quirky mind processes. They must have had some interesting on-the-tour bus conversations, not just about UFOs, but about everything. You can see it's going to spill over into the lyrics. Rise of the Robots sound like an army of robots marching down the streets, taking the world over. It was like Terminator before its time. It also boasted a really fantastic, rabble-rousing chorus. It's weird to read that years later, both Bonnell and Cornwall believed that the song was just a filler for the album, when for the fans, it's one of the favourites. And also, let's not forget Laura Logic's fantastic saxophone. She'd been in X-Ray Specs and played in Oh Bondage Up Yours, and came on and had her own band at the time. And came up to the studio, TW Studios in Fulham, to lay down that great free-form jazz line, which obviously Hugh Cornwell must have really embraced, being a fan of jazz music himself. Let me tell you about Sweden. I will tell you a lot about Sweden. They should have had a lockdown. But in the context of this record, the track was about Hugh Cornwall's experiences of being a lecturer in Lund in Sweden in the early 70s, when he first formed bands, which the lineage kind of goes on and on to become the Stranglers. He found the country insufferably boring, where the clouds, the only things that are interesting are the clouds, a cumulus nimbus, and yet again, it's left to the magic of Dave Greenfield to describe what cumulus nimbus clouds look like on a set of keyboards. Another brilliant piece of modern, at the time, late 70s psychedelia, but with that post-punk edge, because it was dark and it's stark, and stark is a word I will say several times in this review because that record was. The layers of sound are magnificent. Bonnell's bass playing is fantastic on this song. Jet's drumming from one track to the other is always imaginative. He was a powerful meat and potatoes drummer. That's a phrase that they used to use in the 70s, somebody who's dead on the beat and powerful. But he also came from jazz. And everything's like off-kilter, strange timings, weird drum rolls, toms put in odd places, but you could still dance to it. That's absolutely brilliant. The White Side culminates with Toiler On The Sea, a piece that J.J. Bonnell laid down on the Finchy Boys in Bearshank Studio. The Finchy Boy was pushed onto the drums, and J.J. pulled the bass lines. Hugh took this in his mind to holiday to Morocco and came up with that great vocal melody. Perhaps his first vocally crooning part, which would become a staple of the Stranglers sound later on. The song is great. It's one of those fantastic 6-minute pieces of Stranglers. We did so much in those days with one of those great venture-style twanging guitars, and yet again, keyboard line from Dave that described the subject matter of the song. You can hear the sea swelling as Dave plays those keyboards. Maybe it's a harbinger to the Raven album as well. The motive of the sea, the powerful themes of nature threaded through the tracks. The Stranglers are never dull. The subject matter was always fascinating. They may be more famous in the press for fighting and fucking and taking drugs, but they were artistic, and that's what fascinated us. They're also outsiders, and we like that. Grown up in Blackpool and being really into magic mushrooms and punk rock, what better band could there be for us than the Stranglers? The White Side on its own would have been a magnificent record. The Black Side was probably the most dense, darkest, claustrophobic recording of the time. It certainly was the most scary, spooky, spectral, heavy, grinding piece of music that ever been committed to vinyl. I can't think of any other group that have gone so far into the heart of darkness at that point. Not even the often-mentioned Doors, who I love, but I've never seen the connection with the Stranglers. Obviously, there's an influence, but the Stranglers are very much of their period. They're very much of that UK of the late 70s. Angrier, dirtier, grindier, but with a fantastic dark sense of humour. The word dark, of course, a bit like the word stark, is stapled all over a piece like this. The side kicks off with Curfew, a paranoid song about The side kicks off with Curfew, a paranoid song about a lockdown. So apt now. I've seen so many people putting up on their Facebook pages in the last few weeks. At the time, it was about the paranoia of Russia storming in and invading Europe, and the UK being put in some kind of lockdown in a kind of almost civil war collapse kind of situation. It never went out of fashion. I mean, that's the weird thing about so many punk lyrics. They don't seem dated because all the same paranoias possibly will come true at some point anyway. Again, great subject matter and a great vocal from Bonnell. And the black side was to explore the darker regions of J.J. Bonnell's mind. At that time, as he's often admitted, he was quite the psychopath. And that's one of the great things. That's another thing that we really loved about the Stranglers. They did have a psychotic edge. There's something very psychotic about being a slightly unstable 16-year-old anyway. And when you see it soundtracked by a group, it's even better. But sometimes we will look at the other punk bands, which we loved as well, but their aggression seemed fake. Their aggression didn't seem real. They didn't seem they could back it up. I'm not condoning any kind of action or fighting, but when the bouncers are piling into the crowd, there was something quite heartwarming about Bonnell piling in as well, and saving a few of those wanton, spotted youths. People forget about how violent those gigs were in the 70s. When you go and see the Stranglers up in Lancaster, it was like some kind of crazy civil war between the punks and the skins, and Lancaster versus Blackpool versus Morecambe. And somehow Morecambe always won. I never been able to work that one either. The Stranglers are part of all this. They didn't condone violence, but the violence was in there. Bonnell's an intellectual lunatic, and that was what was powerful about him and the band as well. Yukio was intellectual as well. His was not physical; it was a mental violence. Those are violent times. The album had violent structures to it, but the violence went into the music and created something oblique and fascinating. Tracks like Threatened were just utter stinking darkness. The track's got a slow beat, jets like Patient, that's holding the tension all the way through the track, that menacing, growling, prowling bass line. And yet again, Dave is dredging something absolutely magnificent out of those keyboards. Those weird kind of sounds. Never heard anything like it before. I don't think he ever got the credit for being an innovative keyboard player. In the last few days since he's died, people have talked about the magnificence of his skill, and there's no argument about that at all. But so many of the sounds he was coming up with, he was ahead of the game. When you listen to the production skills of Martin Rushent and Alan Winstanley, who did great jobs in those first three albums, it's interesting. I always think that Martin Rushent would end up going on to make his studio completely electronic and producing the great first Pete Shelley solo album and eventually the Human League #1 album, which were built around a lot of keyboard sounds. And I can't help wondering how much Dave was actually paving the way for these records, but totally uncredited, of course. So Threaten was this kind of track built about a conversation that JJ had with some people from Rough Trade about modern architecture. It was a small subject, but he made it massive. And somehow it fitted into that paranoid side of the album, a paranoid, cloying darkness that Joy Division, who are a magnificent group, will make a whole history out of a year and a half later. Death and Night and Blood and Do You Wanna is the centerpiece of the Black Side. In a way that Abbey Road, the Beatles album, saw song fragments threaded together to create a symphony of pop perfection. The Black Side of the Stranglers album saw two songs threaded together with completely opposing kind of themes and opposing kind of styles into a magnificent whole. Death, Night and Blood is a really strange, dark song, but it's also typically the Stranglers who somehow turn the avant-garde into pop music. It's a weird but enticingly catchy piece about the Japanese writer Yukio Mishima, who had an army of bisexual followers and committed a ritual suicide in 1969, seppuku, by getting a sword and cutting himself virtually in half, and as a protest against the Americanization of Japan. Several of these themes appealed to JJ at the time. He was a self-styled punk rock warrior. The only bit he didn't go through with was probably having the army of followers, or you could argue the Fincher Boys for that, and the ritual suicide. He was fascinated with Mishima like David Bowie was as well. And Mishima is a great writer. The sensitivity that's masked, and that's one of his books, The Mask, but the sensitivity that's in his writing is hidden behind the almost brutal image of his bodybuilding and his fascination with the samurai. This and a lot of themes are very similar to JJ himself. At the time, he's very ready with his fists and a dangerous and a self-admitted psychotic persona. But a lot of his writing is incredibly sensitive. And there's like Cornwall as well. Both of them put on a violent front for the Stranglers, which was not a fake violent front. But the textural nuances of their music and their lyrics were fascinating. There was a sensitivity and lots of shades of colour, which is interesting on an album called Black and White that has lots of shades of emotions on it, and lots of shades and textures of sounds and colours and lyrics on it as well. The album title and the whole idea of the album was built around that time. Punk was black and white. It was intense. Everything was opinion. You were either for or you were against. You were either on the bus or you're off the bus. These are all very vital themes at the time. The Stranglers reflected that. Again, it's personal. You're either for the Stranglers, you're against them. You quickly found out as a 16-year-old what fashion was. The Stranglers were never a fashionable band. They were seen as sort of opposing the coolness of the Clash, and the Clash certainly had a cool. And the Clash were in with the music papers, and the Stranglers never were. The Stranglers were if there was a black and white opinion, the Stranglers were on the black side. And they scapulated this blackness by their whole image, their music. And at this point in time, due to the influence of JJ, who started dressing completely in black, the whole band dressed in utilitarian black as well. It draped the stage sets, their dress style, and their music, and it was fantastic. In the Shadows had already been released as a B-side of No More Heroes, yet again maybe as a hint of what was coming. A spooky song, a paranoid song about being on the streets of the UK and the lurking dangers in the shadows. It was also the first time that JJ started to toy with his bass sound, the Barracuda bass. He turned the top off it, and again, it's another kind of stranglified version of dub reggae. Jet plays this absolutely stunning kind of drum line on it. It just kind of sprawls, but absolutely beautifully. And there's one thing about the Stranglers I like to say here. Nothing is ever wasted. There's never an extra beat when you don't need one. There's never an end of a song where they just carry on playing. There's never a demo of a song you never heard before or another version. Well, very rarely. Everything they have is concentrated perfection. Nearly every song they have has a different ending from the rest of the song, like a riff that anyone else would die for, thrown into the fade out. The Stranglers always had, everything was intense. Every second, every piece of music was thought out and brilliantly executed. In the Shadows is like that as well. It kind of sways backwards and forwards. It collapses in and out of itself. And it really gets that kind of shivering kind of nervousness that was like post-midnight UK streets in the 70s. The final track on the album is another one that the two frontmen have often claimed was another throwaway track. My God, if only we had the luxury of throwing away tracks this good. Enough Time, it rides in on, it's just got this kind of bass that kind of collapses backwards and forwards with this kind of like fantastic beef-arty guitar line from Cornwall. His guitar playing is absolutely fantastic, and I have no truck with anybody ever says that his guitar playing was a weak link in the Stranglers. He's one of the most idiosyncratic and inventively brilliant guitar players that British music's ever come up with. Every single riff he plays is off-kilter, imaginative. You would not even think of putting a part like that in there. But the bottom line is, like everything in Stranglers, it's catchy as fuck. Just like the bass, every riff is hammered into your brain forever. They're really stunningly catchy riffs. Enough Time is a song about, it's an apocalyptic end to the album. It sounds like the world is ending, and the Morse code, as it dabbles in at the end of the song, says this truly is the end. Hello Earth, we are fucked. In the sessions for Black and White, the band being very productive, also recorded a couple of old songs. And these kind of fit in a weird kind of way to the record. Even Tits, which was the song they would play to bottling crowds that couldn't stand them at the time, is put on the record. It's on the free EP that came Walk On By, which I would count in with these sessions as well, because Walk On By feels like a track that fits into Black and White kind of mode, with that kind of grinding bass line, and Dave playing that superb keyboard break in the middle. There's also Mean to Me, a song from way back in their early days, tanked up, cranked up into like a tough little Go Buddy Go style rock and roll tune. Oh Codger, what a great song. Getting George Melly to sing it, very Hugh. It rides in on a really sort of sleazy, evil cockroach bass riff, swings like the weirdest piece of jazz ever. It's like Charlie Mingus gone post-punk. And the other song they recorded that time was probably, I think it was one of the first ones they did in all the sessions of Black and White. 1 minute, 6 seconds of Shut Up, a punk rock slash, the B-side of Nice and Sleazy, a killer song. If only it was longer, it would have. The Black and White sessions saw the Stranglers at the top of their game. I love The Raven for its sheer inventiveness. I love quite a lot of the later records as well. And in recent years, the comeback's been great. Since Norfolk Coast, when they found their mojo again, there's many other high moments. But I have to look at the context of the time and how far out there Black and White was. It reinvented the wheel. It changed everything. Any band you ever hear with a cranked up bass is coming off that album. Initially inspired by Rattus, but take it to its logical conclusion on Black and White. I meet people all over the world and bands, from Jesus Mary Chain to Mark Lanigan to Steve Albini, God, you name them, to Stone Roses. Everybody loves that record. It was a key record at the time. Still doesn't get the credit it deserves, really. The whole concept was great as well, because it's also the Stranglers' best album cover. I love the Rattus cover as well. I think Rattus really suits the album. But Black and White, stark, just the four of them, no logo. That's all you need. There's no waste. That's the thing yet again about this record. Every single thing that they need is needed. Anything that's wasted is in the bin. It's disciplined. It's tight. It's brilliant. The album cover tells you everything you need to know about it. The band are captured perfect in their personas. Bennell looks dangerous, like a grenade that's about to explode. Hugh Corman looks mysterious. You can't see his face and his hands are in gloves. Jet Black looks surly. Oddly, he's placed at the front, where they usually stick the singer. But the Stranglers were never about singers and frontmen. These are four people equally important to the group. Each one was a corner. Each one was a foundation to this powerful pyramid. Dave Greenfield, wearing JJ's jacket to the side and his odd pair of mod shoes, looks quirky, looks odd, but cool. The whole composite of the band looks like this. It's the Stranglers as I always want to remember them. The perfect band at the perfect time with a perfect record.